Hi, I'm Sharon Winsmith, a tax attorney, active investor, and your go-to resource for proven investment and tax planning strategies. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about why I think buying a home early in your wealth building journey is a really, really bad idea. I know this is a very emotional topic that brings out a lot of anger in a lot of people about it. For some reason, people get really mad when you talk about the concept of renting versus buying. This is my personal opinion. I'm going to show you why I think this is a bad idea. I'm going to talk to you about the reasons I think buying a home is a bad idea when you're young. Then I'll talk to you a little bit about and walk you through an example where I showed an example between buying a home in Austin, Texas versus renting a home and the difference in your overall net worth that you can have if you made the decision to buy versus rent early in your life. So again, I know a lot of people watching this video already own their own home or may be considering buying a home. Even if you do go ahead and make that purchase, I think it's important that you understand the concepts that I'm talking about here. I was actually at a dinner party with some friends a few weeks ago, and the topic came up where they were thinking about buying a home, but it was a stressful financial decision for them, and they asked my advice on it. I am very clear about being very, very anti-home ownership. This has been ingrained in me from my finance classes in college to now. I've always thought that buying a home is not necessarily a great idea, especially if you are still in the building wealth phase of your life. So again, I know a lot of people are going to go ahead and make that decision. There's a lot of factors that come into play when you're thinking about buying a home. In this video, I am only speaking about the financial considerations. I know there's a lot of other considerations that may come into play and may influence your decision. So I'm very aware of that. Keep in mind, I'm only talking about the financial considerations here. I know there's a lot of people who think about buying a home early. There's a lot of lack of flexibility there. You may get stuck in one area. You may have good job opportunities in the future that would require you to move that you can't easily make. It's hard to kind of get out of, a situation when you bought a home. So I know there's a lot of considerations that come into play, but I'm going to talk to you about why I think it is a really, really bad, if not the worst financial decision that I see a lot of really smart young people make. So let's go ahead and start with just the conceptual reasons why I think buying a home is a bad idea. So to start with, I've talked about this a lot. I don't think this is super controversial at this point, but your home is a liability. It is not an asset. I know our grandparents used to say that their largest asset was their home. That was actually a mistake. We've learned from that. Your home is not an asset. It does not make money for you. A lot of people think my home appreciated in value. Well, in a lot of cases, when you factor in all the money you've paid to fix, your AC when it breaks, you got to always replace those busted hot water heaters. If you're going to own a home for a long time, you're going to have to do things like replace the roof, which I know I hear my dad talk about all the time is so expensive. It is a huge cost. These are things I don't worry about because I rent. I don't have to pay anything other than my rent. And yes, it's a lot of rent. It would blow a lot of your minds about how much I pay in rent, but it is still the best financial decision I've ever made in my life was not to go out and spend a lot of money on a down payment in an apartment in New York City. So your home is not a liability. I'm not going to talk much about this. I think this is, pretty much, if you don't agree with this, then I would challenge you to really look at the other materials on this, because if you're still viewing your home or the equity in your home as an asset, that's, I think, a very dangerous assumption to be making. Also, there's a lot of upfront costs when you purchase the home. So you've got to pay closing fees, inspections, renovations. It's very rare. One of the big positives to buying a home is that you can kind of make it your own, or if you're building a house, it can be what you want. But if you're going out and buying a home, chances are good you're going to have to make some improvements or renovations to make it how you like it. So there's always upfront costs. Even if you don't do that, there's always upfront costs. You've got to pay attorneys. You've got to pay inspections. There's tons of different costs, and they add up when you're looking at buying a home. When you sell your home, there's even more cost. You've got to pay those realtor fees. I hate that 5% that you always have to pay the realtors when you sell your home. So when you're looking at your net worth, and if you are someone who, adds the value of your home into your net worth, make sure you subtract 5% for those closing fees that you're going to have to pay to your realtor just for listing the home. And there's all kinds of other costs when you sell a home. You may have to be, required to fix things. In New York City, anytime you sell a home, there is what's called a mansion tax that could apply. I think it applies to, apartments or, homes in New York City that are above $1 million. So that's basically everything that anybody watching this video is probably looking at buying. You're not getting much in New York City for less than that. So there's this 3% transfer tax that applies. That is huge. That is just another tax. In a lot of cases, when you sell your home, there is a home exclusion for, a certain amount when you sell your home. So you may not have to pay tax, but if you're owning your home for a long time and it does appreciate in value, you are paying some tax when you sell that home. So think about those costs. It's not just, the same as investing in something else, because when I invest in other investments and I unwind those investments, I'm not having to pay these large costs. I'm certainly not paying a 5% realtor fee for someone to sell my house in order to be able to get out of that investment. So that's very important. You have to factor that in when you're thinking about, adding up. If you're going to go out and model this, which you should, I have modeled this to death, this rent versus buy, scenario. You've got to add all these costs in. You've got to add in the costs that I mentioned, replacing the roofs, all that stuff you have to pay for. I'm not counting a lot of things here. I'm not, lawn care, HOA fees, maintenance fees, repairs, those are huge. Those add up, and people don't think about that when they're, factoring that into what's the better decision to make. Also, this goes back to your home not being an asset. I absolutely hate expenses that are not tax deductible. I try to minimize those as much as possible. Everything you pour into your home, unless you're claiming the home office deduction, or you're one of the very few people who actually gets a tax benefit from the mortgage interest deduction, then you are, for the most part, paying a ton of expenses that are not tax deductible. And I generally don't like expenses, but I can tell you I hate expenses that are not tax deductible. So you're just throwing those costs away. In some cases, they may increase the value of your home, but in a lot of cases, it really doesn't when you factor things out in the long term. Home values, a lot of people think, that I hear this a lot, my home's doubled in value. Well, good, because investments should go up. But historically, and I know there's exceptions to this, if you're able to, be one of the lucky few to, have bought an apartment in Manhattan 20, 30 years ago, you made a killing. But you can't just, a lot of that's just the same as playing the lottery. It's hard to kind of guess where markets are going to go. So modest historical appreciation for real estate in the past. So home values don't go up a lot. They do generally go up. It's about 3 to 4%. That is an absolutely terrible return on your money. If you think that getting 3 or 4% a year is a good return or appreciation, and again, that is not taking into account all these costs you've had to pay to maintain that home that you're not getting a benefit of, but that is an absolutely horrific return on your money. So don't let anybody tell you otherwise. That is absolutely terrible. So modest historical appreciation at best for home value. So again, it's not an asset. It's not something that's really appreciating in value. When you factor in all those expenses you're paying to maintain that home, then you're probably really kind of breaking even, and you're certainly not keeping up with inflation in a lot of cases. So these last are going to come in and be a lot easier to understand when I walk you through my example, but you've got to understand the opportunity cost of large down payments. I hear a lot of people say this is a kind of a very antiquated view of things. Well, if you're renting, you're paying somebody else's mortgage. So that really just ignores opportunity costs. You cannot be a good investor. You should not invest one dime in anything unless you understand opportunity costs and how that works. If I've got, $500,000 to put as a down payment on a home, I have to compare that to what if I took that $500,000 and invested that in an investment that was actually an asset and kicking off returns every year that far exceeded this, 3 to 4% pre-expense number that your home's giving you. So you have to think about opportunity costs. Really what it comes down to when you're looking at renting versus buying, and you're looking at it from a financial perspective, which is really, in my opinion, the biggest consideration you should be thinking about if you're someone who wants to build wealth, then you have to look at opportunity costs. You have to look at, am I better off taking this money and putting it as a down payment on a home as opposed to investing it in something else, in an asset, an actual asset that is going to make you money. So a lot of us, people just have it ingrained in their head that you're supposed to, save money when you graduate college and buy a home. That is not an asset. When you are at your earliest stage, because the earlier you start investing, the more and more benefit you get from compounding. If you model out compounding, look at when you get to those later years, when you get to your 60s, your 70s, your 80s, that is when the returns are just astronomical. It is mind-blowing. That is where the beauty of compounding is huge, but you've got to start early. Look at the difference if you start saving $100 a month and investing that when you're in your 20s as opposed to your 30s. Look at the lifetime potential there. So if you go out and take every bit of savings you have and put that as a down payment and a liability like a home, your lifetime earning potential is absolutely just completely different than it would have been. You were talking about millions of dollars of difference. I'm going to show you that in my example. So it is a game changer. If you instead invest every penny you have and as much as possible into investments and actual assets and start doing that early instead of buying a home that you don't need, then the difference in your wealth that you're going to accumulate over your lifetime is huge. So if you're wanting to achieve financial freedom, buying a home, I personally think is the biggest financial mistake that you can make, other than doing something stupid like getting credit card debt or, something, or making a really bad investment. So this is important. This is the most important thing I want to stress. When it comes to the rent versus buy scenario, to me, this wins every time. I've never seen a model where it was remotely close, and I'm going to show you mine, which I've modeled very conservatively. Also, this is very important. I never in my life have ever heard anyone else say these things. I don't know why this isn't talked about more, but the types of investments that you can make depend on how much money you have. When you reach accredited investor status, the types of investments open up to you. You're talking higher returns I'm talking passive investments. You're talking higher returns, more tax efficiency, better investments, better diversification with good sponsors. You can start investing in things like real estate funds, real estate syndications, let alone, that you just have more money to invest at that point. So if you don't understand the concepts of accredited investor and qualified purchaser, you absolutely need to understand those. The delay to getting accredited investor status, your home is not an asset. The SEC does not count it as an asset when it's determining if you have enough net worth to be an accredited investor or a qualified purchaser. Once you become a qualified purchaser and have over 5 million of investable assets, the types of investments available to you, it's just completely different world. It blows my mind the types of investments that I'm able to make from private equity funds, venture capital funds, GP stakes funds. These may, sound like foreign concepts to you, but you've got to know these things. If you're not there yet, the last thing you want to do is delay that. So you can have a net worth of $10 million, but if that's equity in a home, you are not an accredited investor and you are not a qualified purchaser. But if you have, $10 million of investments in something that is an actual asset that counts within the definition of these things, then that is very important, because then you're able to make these great investments that aren't available to everyone else. So I'll show you, I'll illustrate that better when I walk through the example for you, but this is important. I don't know why this isn't talked about more, but when you go buy a home and you take your money and you put it as a down payment on a home, that money just comes out of the equation as far as deciding if you're a credit investor, and it comes out of the equation to decide if you're a qualified purchaser. So the last thing you want to do is have a big portion of your net worth tied up as equity in a home. So that, I cannot stress enough how important that is, and you're not going to hear anybody else talk about that elsewhere. Okay, so let's walk through a quick example here where we're going to compare the difference between if you went out and bought a home for $750,000 in Austin, Texas, as opposed to renting that same home. So these are the basic assumptions we're making here with this model. I'm going to show you scenario 1 where you buy the home, and then I'm going to show you scenario 2 where you rent the home instead of buying a home, so that you can see the financial impact and the difference on your overall net worth over the same time period. So I'm going to assume that it's a $750,000 home. Again, we're assuming the market is Austin, Texas. You would put as little down as possible. When you're buying a home, we know it's bad, to tie up too much of our money in equity in a home. So we're going to put down the typical 20% that's required. So that means you're going to put down $150,000 on the home if you buy it, and you're going to get a mortgage for the rest, which is a $600,000 mortgage. I'm going to assume interest right now is 6%. It's much higher right now at the time I'm recording this video. I know a lot of people a couple of years ago, or, even, a year or so ago, were able to get lower interest rates. But in a lot of cases, right now at the time I'm recording, you'd probably have high sevens, maybe 8% interest, depending on what your credit score is. So I'm going to model this conservatively with 6%. I'm going to assume the standard 30-year term. With that, our annual financing cost on those facts would be $43,508. So this is what we'd have to pay our mortgage payment every year. I'm going to assume property taxes of 2%. That is a little bit lower than it would be in the Austin, Texas market, but I'm applying the property tax to the full value of the home. I know usually you only apply it to what they call the building itself. Typically the land is subtracted. So you wouldn't typically apply the property tax rate to the full value of the home. It would be slightly less, but it should even out because I'm using a lower rate than would actually be the property tax rate in Austin, Texas. So we've done a lot of research here. I am modeling this very conservatively in the sense that I am giving as much benefit of the doubt to homeownership than I am renting. So we've looked at this and really come up with, comparisons and figured out that the average rental cost, the high end would be for a $750,000 house would be about $44,400. And that's the annual rental cost that you would have to pay to rent that house of equivalent value if you were going to instead rent instead of buying. So don't come at me saying this is too, high. It would be lower. This is on the upper end of the range from our research. We have really looked into this. And I'm again, modeling this very conservatively. You would actually be able to pay a lot less and get the same house in reality, but I want to be really conservative so that there's no room for error here as far as, I really want you to see the impact on your finances. So I'm going to assume an average rental increase of 2.5%. That's again pretty high. I live in New York City and I've never paid or had a rent increase of 2.5% the entire time I've lived here. There was 1 year after COVID when rates have gone down so much, rentals, value had gone down so much that it went up a little bit more than 2.5%, but that was just to get it back up to the pre-COVID rate. So again, this is a lot higher than my experience has been and that I think most people experience is what you would typically expect to apply. So I'm going to assume average home appreciation of 4%. This is on the higher end. Usually it's closer to 3 or low 3s. But again, I want to model this as conservatively as possible, as favorably as possible to home ownership so that you can see the problem here. I'm going to assume investment returns. So we know that if we didn't put that $150,000 down as a down payment on a home, then we would invest that same money into something that was actually an asset. So whatever investment you would make, I'm going to assume average 10% returns. People may tell you that this is too high. This is not. That's a myth. You should be able to get 10% returns easily if you know what you're doing on average year by year. So I'm going to assume the opportunity cost here is 10%. And we're going to assume when we rent versus buy that that's the investment return rate we're getting. So in scenario 1, I'm going to say that on January 1st, we went out and bought the home. So you can see that, this is the beginning value of your home. I applied the gain increase of 4% every year. So that's going to go up. Your home's going to appreciate $30,000 in that first year. And, every year thereafter, it's going to appreciate. This is going to be the value of your home at the end of year 1 after you purchased it. These are your mortgage payments. This is the breakdown between principal and interest. So this is your annual mortgage payment that you have to pay to the bank for the financing. And this is property taxes. So these are the only 2 costs I'm assuming in this example. I am not assuming anything else. We know there's a lot of other costs with home ownership, from HOA fees to landscaping to utilities to repairs and maintenance, all kinds of costs. I'll show you an example when we're done with this one where I do factor in a lot of that stuff so you can see just how big the difference is. But here, I'm purely looking at the financial impact here and, not even taking into account those other costs that you would have to pay if you bought the home as opposed to renting it. So this is your annual cost of the home. I'm assuming this is your disposable income for the year. It's basically about $58,500, and you're paying all that over to, the bank and to the government for property taxes. So at the end of year 1, you have paid down a little bit of your principal. It's not a lot at the beginning, because at the beginning of the mortgage, we know it's much higher interest allocations to interest than principal. So here's the outstanding mortgage at the end of the year. Here's your net worth. So it's your home value less your, mortgage that you own. We're going to talk into realtor commission will come into play in the future when we go to sell the home. We can ignore that for now, but here's your net worth at the end of year 1. So, you went out and bought this home, you had $150,000, you invested it, as a down payment in a home. At the end of the year, that's your net worth. So we're going to go all the way out 30 years later to when you have paid off the mortgage. So in 2052, you've made your final mortgage payment to the bank and you own the home outright. So here's the value of your home at the end of that year. And you may think, now I'm a millionaire. This is great. I have $2.4 million. My home increased in value, more than doubled. I made a lot of money, and, outstanding mortgage. I don't owe anything. So here's my net worth at the end of that 30-year period. So you cannot actually get the cash out of that home unless you were to refinance the mortgage, which I'm going to ignore for here. If you were going to own a home, you should be refinancing throughout the ownership because you want to extract out the equity. But, for purposes of this, I'm just showing you the difference between buying versus renting. So here, your home value is $2.4 million. You've got to pay that pesky realtor commission of 5%. So that leaves you with $2.3 million. So your net worth at the end of, when 30 years, when you've paid off that mortgage, is $2.3 million. You may think that's fantastic. That's great. I'm a millionaire. I have so much money. And, this was a great investment. So I'm going to show you why that was a bad idea. So let's go down to option 2 now. So here, I don't own a home. I'm renting. So I can invest that $150,000 I was going to use to put as a down payment on a home. I'm now going to put that in some sort of investment that's kicking off 10+%, a year, and I'm going to invest that in something that's really an asset that's going to, make money for me in the future. So my gain here, I'm going to make gains on that money every year. I've got to pay my rent though. We can't forget that. You instead of paying money to the bank, you're paying rent to the landlord, whoever owns the home. But because your payments are going to be less than they would if you had bought the home. So when you bought the home, you had to pay property taxes every year and you had to pay your mortgage payment. Here, you just have to pay one payment, which is rent, and all that's taken care of. So you've got a little bit of excess cash to invest. So I'm assuming you had the same money in scenario 1 as scenario 2. So instead of paying that over to, the government and property taxes or to the bank as a mortgage payment, we're going to put that into that same investment that is kicking off, or a different investment. I mean, obviously we would diversify, but we're going to put that into our investments that are kicking off 10+% a year. And, that's excess money we're going to get to put in and invest and, make more money on that in the future. So at the end of year 1, I have a net worth of almost $180,000. Yes, that's a little bit less than option 2. So you may say, in 1 year, I'm better off if I had owned the home. Well, I'm going to show you how that quickly changes, and it changes very quickly and to a significant degree. So let's fast forward to 30 years in the future when I have paid off that mortgage if I had bought the home. So now I have, investments worth $4.2 million, over $4.2 million. Yes, I'm paying $90,000 in rent. That may blow your mind. But, again, a lot of this is psychology. People just can't stomach the fact that they're paying $90,000 in rent to someone, but they're happy to pay way more money and have a lot less money by buying the home. So again, a lot of it comes down to psychology. You've got to understand and just focus on the facts and the way it works out from a financial standpoint. So yes, you're paying almost $100,000 in rent, but look, you've got $4.2 million now because you were able to make a lot more money off of that money that you would have tied up as equity in a home, which would have been a liability. Instead, you took that money and made the smart decision and invested it. So what's the difference? So in scenario 1, if I bought my home, I've got $2.3 million. Whereas in scenario 2, if I rented instead and, rented that same house, then I have $4.2 million. So the difference is almost $2 million to your net worth. That is purely the financial difference. I'm going to show you some other differences as well that will significantly impact your finances. But this is just the difference. If you had just all else equal, rented the same house instead of bought it, you would have been $2 million ahead as far as your overall net worth. So again, I'm just talking about the finance. I'm not talking about the flexibility. You could have rented a significantly cheaper home at the beginning when you didn't have kids, when you didn't need as much space. And you could also rent again when your kids are gone. So, you don't have to, if you're buying a home, you've got to buy the home that you need, throughout your life. You've got to buy the home that's big enough for your kids. Whereas if you're renting, there's a lot of flexibility, but I'm modeling this very conservatively in favor of, home ownership to show just how, this is the base case, most conservative modeling. This is only going to get a lot worse when you take into account flexibility with renting cheaper places, at different times in your life. When you take into account all the other expenses, I'll show you a quick example. I start to put in those expenses that you would have to pay as a homeowner that you don't have to pay as a renter. And the other thing I want to show you, which is very, very important, is that if we get to year 2038, year 16, so this is 16 years after you made the decision of renting versus buying, this person becomes an accredited investor. They have over $1 million of net worth, and that's investable assets, $1 million. So what happens to them is they now can invest in much better investments that people who aren't accredited investors can invest in. So for example, real estate funds, syndications, debt funds, all types of investment funds, let alone the fact that you just have more, money that you can work with and borrow against to make other investments, do all kinds of things with, but you're an accredited investor in year 16. This person is not. They may have a home and a net worth over $1 million, but that does not count. The government does not view that as an asset and does not let you count that when determining if you're an accredited investor. So this person is not an accredited investor. When does the homeowner become an accredited investor? Not until 2052, when they sell their home 30 years later and actually take out the cash from that home. So if all your money is tied up, or a large portion of your money is tied up in your home, then you're not an accredited investor because the government is not going to let you count that. They do not view that as an asset. So this person does not get to invest in good investments that are available to accredited investors until 2052, year 30, and that's if you sell your home at that point. So that's a big difference that I never hear people talk about. I think most financial people who know what they're doing, they're always going to tell you you're better off financially to rent versus buy. I think that's pretty well settled at this point. And I'll show you in the next scenario when I start to factor in things like costs that homeowners have to pay for that you don't as a renter. But nobody ever talks about the fact that when you buy a home, you are delaying the time to be an accredited investor, and even worse, you're delaying the time to be a qualified purchaser. So I'll show you the qualified purchaser impact on the next one. So this is just the same model. I'm just going to layer in some costs that homeowners have to bear. So same fact pattern, but here I'm putting in other things. I'm putting in repairs and maintenance. So I'm being very, conservative with this model. I just did 10,000 every 10 years and 5,000 every 5 years. So very conservative with repairs and maintenance. A lot of people say you have to model, several percentage of your home value every year. Closing costs, you're going to pay a lot to buy that home. You're going to have to pay a lot of money to go out and purchase that home. I'm being very conservative here. They usually tell you 2 or 3% of your purchase price for closing costs. But again, I wanted to be very conservative, so there's no room for argument. Miscellaneous costs, landscaping, garbage, you name it, you've got to pay for it. As a renter, I don't ever pay for that stuff. I don't pay anything. I don't pay my utilities. I pay one check over to my landlord every month, and that includes everything. That includes all this stuff and everything else. There's all kinds of other things, let alone renovations that you want to do to make the home, to the place you want it. All kinds of things that you have to pay for as a homeowner that you wouldn't have to pay if you rented. So let's just look at what the difference would be in the scenario where we actually take into account more accurate situation. So here we've got, our $2.3 million home at the year 30 when we pay off our mortgage. But if we instead invested that same money, the excess money, and instead took what we were going to use as down payment, invested it in an asset, we've now got $5 million. So you're talking about almost a $3 million difference to your net worth when you take into account the actual real cost that you're gonna have to pay for home ownership. So again, I think it's pretty well settled out there. I don't hear anyone really try to argue that you're better off buying a home. I think that was kind of something we just psychologically thought was better because that's what our grandparents did, and to some extent our parents' generation. So I think most people understand that financially you're better off, renting than buying. That's the way the numbers always shake out. You may say to me, well, I couldn't get 10%, investment returns. Well, then you should understand how to invest your money, because that's not that hard to do. Anyone who tells you otherwise doesn't know what they're doing or is a financial advisor. So don't listen to anybody who tries to say you can't get 10% returns, and that's not the true opportunity cost. I modeled this very conservatively in favor of homeownership. I gave a really high home value percentage. I underestimated expenses in a lot of cases. I overestimated the rental value of the home. So, say what you want about, but this is the most conservative way to model it. And so you're talking about $2.7 million as the base. That's the starting point. It's really going to be a lot worse when you really factor in reality in the real life situation. The other thing I want to mention is, the point about accredited investor and qualified purchaser. So this person in 2052 is a qualified purchaser. This person is not. They probably never will be. And this is the difference this is when I say that buying a home can be the difference maker in whether or not you ever get financial freedom. Not only has this person got a lot less money, they can invest in, make investments in the really best types of investments out there, which are only limited to qualified purchasers. So beyond the accredited investor status, now qualified purchaser status, this person's life has just changed. They can invest in private equity funds, venture capital funds, hedge funds, should you so choose, GP stakes, types of investments that kick off far, superior returns to any other investments you can make, that are really great quality investors. You're investing with some of the best sponsors out there, because the best sponsors don't want, they're going to limit their investments to qualified purchasers at a minimum. In a lot of cases, even qualified purchasers have to have a lot more money to do it. But again, this is going to be a game changer. The types of investments this person can make as opposed to this person are significantly different. The person, if you had bought a home, you would probably never be a qualified purchaser in your life, because if you're talking about 30 years later, you're still not even halfway there, I would say goodbye, to the chance of ever being a qualified purchaser. This person is on their road, if not already at financial freedom, because of the investments they can make. So this was just a quick example of, the difference between buying a home versus renting. I encourage you to model this yourself based on your own market. If I were to model this for the New York City market, it would be drastically different. You could probably double this number as far as the difference. If I went out and made a bad decision, like bought an apartment in New York City as opposed to renting, that is always going to be a bad financial mistake because of a lot of nuances in New York City. But model this yourself. See that the numbers always shake out this way in favor of renting. Understand that there's other things that are at play here that would make it much better to rent than buy, largely because of the delay to be an accredited investor or qualified purchaser. So hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel.